Council meeting 11 September. Councillors, first I'd like to acknowledge we're a country. Council acknowledges the traditional custodians of the land where we work and live. Council celebrates the diversity of Aboriginal people and their ongoing cultures, connections to the land and waters of New South Wales Central Tablelands. Councillors and members of the public be advised that proceedings of this meeting is recorded and made public available on the council website. Any persons attending the meeting should refrain from making any defamatory statements. Mr. General Manager, do we have any apologies?
No apologies, Mr. Chair.
Can I have a mover and seconder, please, councillors? Councillor Reynolds, Councillor Capel, all four? Aye. Means carried.
Aye.
Any disclosure of interest?
Mr. Chair, no disclosures made today.
Mover and seconder. Councillor Leslie, Councillor Reynolds, are you right? All four? Means carried. Councillors, I'll move straight to the presentations. We've got Leanne Smith, the Director of Intentus, Chartered Council on behalf of New South Wales Audit Office regarding our management report and financial statements. Leanne, can I hand over to you?
Yes,
and could I just ask, are you happy for councillors to ask questions during, or would you like it at the end?
I'm happy for them to ask them later. That's fine.
No worries, councillors, just make it clear to me if you'd like to ask a question. Ms. Smith, I'll hand it over to you.
Great, thank you. All right, thank you. And I know originally this meeting was sort of scheduled just to deal with the financial statements so we could get them through, but it looks like you've got an exciting delivery program to talk about afterwards, so I won't take too much of your time. So we're here to talk about the financial statements for 2020. So if you jump over. So we're going to have a look at the significant matters and also some of the key areas, I guess, of interest in the financials. So the operating result, where your income and expenditure are coming from, cash and investments, and also the performance ratios that are required by the Office of Local Government. So significant matters for 2020. The operating result was slightly lower than the prior year. That was primarily a result of the fact that there was only one aerial spraying program that was run during the year, and as councillors would be aware, whether or not that aerial spraying program is run in full or only in part obviously makes a big impact on the financial results of the council. The other thing that occurred this year was that there was a change in the revenue accounting standards. So what this season saw was a change in the way some of your grants were treated in terms of the timing of revenue recognition. So the grant for the design and publication of the weeds identification book that was received last financial year, and also part of the Mexican feathergrass funding, is that correct? Yes, good. Where they're now, instead of being recorded as income when the cash turns up in council's bank account, grants where you have specific performance obligations. So with the weeds publication, you need to publish a book on weeds identification. So from now on, we're back to, you only recognise that revenue as and when you deliver what you were supposed to deliver under the contract. So it's getting back to matching income and expenditure. So everyone's happy with, yep, we're back to matching.
So did you have to make an adjustment through?
Yes, there was an adjustment to opening equity. So we didn't have to go back and change the prior year figures, but there is an adjustment to opening equity for the $40,000 for the weeds identification book, and the $4,000 for the Mexican feathergrass came in this 2020 financial year. So instead of recognising it as revenue, that $4,000 has just gone to contract. It's called contract liabilities if you're looking for it. So at the end of the year, there's $44,000 in contract liabilities. Okay, so operating result for the year, as I said, it's down a little bit. Sorry, councillor, I'm in front of you. So it was 101 in 2019. It's down to 44 in 2020. Probably the other thing, 2019 did have that $40,000 of revenue came in for the weeds identification book, which was recognised as income last year under the old accounting standards, but also obviously the impact of the cutback on the aerial spraying program. Revenue and expenditure. So this year, 1.2, just short of $1.3 million in revenue, and 1.2 million in expenditure. And as you can see, both of them are down. And we'll have a look at them in a little bit more detail. Next slide, thank you. Oh no, not the next slide, this one. So this is, we've looked at this just briefly the last couple of years. So this is looking at the constituent council contributions, because they're obviously your largest source of recurring income and steady income. And I guess what's pleasing is that the gap between your fixed expenses, which are employee costs, and your other expenses is closing in a little bit, which is good. Okay. So operating revenue by source, that user charges and fees figure at the front there that's jumping around from year to year, that's where the aerial spraying program income would be. And that's pretty much, I think it has been the last 3 years where that's been impacted by the prevailing weather conditions, primarily the ongoing drought. The grants and operating contribution, sorry, the grants and contributions last year were a little bit higher. Again, that's where that $40,000 of grant funding for the weeds identification book was last year. And then the constituent council contributions are up a little on the prior year, which I'm sure you're all well aware of that. So that's it. Your interest revenue is down slightly, even though you do actually have more money in the bank. Probably the only comment I'd make on that is, well, interest rates are pretty low, so that's not much you can do about that at the moment. So that's unfortunate when you do actually have some money that is available to invest, but that's just where things are at now, unfortunately. Operating expenditure, as you can see, the last couple of years, the employee costs have stayed fairly stable, which is nice to see. Have a little bit more stability in terms of staffing. The materials and contracts figure, which again is the one that's jumping around, that's where the cost of the contractors and the chemicals for the aerial spraying programs would be. So again, that's why that's moving around. In terms of cash and investments, as I said, that's up, which is pleasant. $1.1 million at the end of 2020 compared to the $993,000 the year before. And as you can see, certainly going back to 2017 where it dipped down to about 750, there's been a progressive accumulation of those funds, which is good because it then gives you some flexibility to take up any opportunities that might arise within the context of your council's constraints.
Did you have cash investments in 2017? Was that because of some of the employee?
Yeah, that's when is it Les left, and I think Cheryl. So some of those longer term employees and the termination payments and the payout of long service leave. Yep. So not termination necessarily, but payout of annual leave and long service leave entitlements and those sorts of things. Saw the cash take a bit of a hit that year. In terms of your total cash and investments, in the local government financials, these are obviously broken up between externally restricted and internally restricted and unrestricted funds. There is a small amount of externally restricted funds there. Again, that's coming back to those grants where you haven't actually completed the work. So they're restricted funds in relation to the unexpended grants. The internal restrictions have gone up a little bit. Council spent some time during the year, and I know certainly the General Manager and Lisa did a fair amount of work during the year looking at the internal restrictions. So that drop in the unrestricted cash is really a product of the review of the internal restrictions rather than anything else. So it's just a balance up. And my understanding is that there's more work coming up in the next couple of months in relation to looking at those internal restrictions. Operating performance ratios, so you'd all be familiar with these from your general purpose councils. The operating performance ratio, there's a benchmark of 0% or 0, so you're supposed to be over 0. So it's looking at whether you're containing your operating expenditure within your operating revenue. The one thing, this ratio looks like it's jumped around a bit, but I guess one of the things with Upper Macquarie is that because you have relatively small dollar figures involved in your operations, a small dollar figure movement will actually make a really large percentage increase or a large percentage movement. So certainly that drop in that ratio is not anything that is of concern. It's simply, it looks worse. It looks like more of a drop than it is because of the dollar figures involved.
Given to you, Mr. Chair, that the type of organisation we are, and that we should be trying to spend, because we're council funded, once we've got a set amount of money, I would make the assumption that we should be as close to zero as possible, but probably just slightly in the positive so we're not going backwards, rather than having a ratio of, say, 7, which I think was 2019 from the figures here, which means that we're not spending, we should be spending more on weeds rather than just putting money away for the rainy day type thing.
Yes, I would, in principle, I would agree with that, Mr. Chair. However, you've obviously then also, you've got the constraints of, you know, the weather conditions is a big issue for weed control, and has been, and that's what's impacted the aerial spraying program. And I guess the other issue is that you only have so many staff. So yes, in theory, the ideal would be where councillors going out spending this money and doing what it's there to do, but practicalities of that can be not quite as simple as that. So you've only got so many bodies on the ground, and there's only so much work you can get through.
So a follow-on question, Mr. Chair. With regard to if we did have a negative year to claw back because we had a good weather year this year, and so as in while these ratios, as in that's the target, as in we're not going to be penalised in any way because we don't actually have any loans, for example, through Tingle, etc. If we did have a negative ratio one year.
Okay. So you don't have to finish it.
Would you be penalised in any way?
Would we be penalised in any way if we did have a negative ratio?
You might get named in the audit office report to local government, but no. There are, I'm not sure where everyone here, their general purpose council is falling this year, but there are general purpose councils who are below that line. So there's no, hard part. And you're right, you wouldn't get a T Corp loan, but I only found out, I didn't realise you can't get a T Corp loan unless you want at least $1 million anyway. So you're probably not going to be worried about that.
We struggle to get a lot of things.
But yeah, no, I understand. Your theory is correct. It's just how you actually enact that with the staffing and the other constraints that you've got. The next ratio is the own source operating revenue ratio. This one, the nature of Upper Macquarie means that you're probably never ever going to achieve this ratio. And again, you can see that the 2016 and 17 where you were closer to it than you are now, they were the last 2 years where you ran full aerial spraying programs. So obviously the fact that you're not running those programs is what's contributed to those low figures in the last 3 years. The reality of it, and I think the General Manager pointed it out in his business papers for the meeting, is that the nature of the Macquarie is that you're going to be hard pressed to ever meet that ratio. But it is a mandatory disclosure.
That never poses a problem because of the structure of a council like ours? Again, no. I think there's an acceptance that, you know, the nature of a council, like a county council in particular, is that you are reliant on constituent council contributions and you are constrained in what you can actually do. So therefore there is certainly an acceptance that, this is the reality for a county council, generally speaking. Yes.
Can I ask a question?
Councillor Kevin, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Leanne, is there an argument contributions from constituent councils which are, if you like, the shareholders of this organisation should not be treated, they should be treated as own source income in the same way as a company's shareholders contributing capital would basically be considered as own source income? Sorry? That's quite a reaction to the question.
I guess
someone laughing at me?
In theory, you could come up with an argument maybe, but I'm not sure. You would need to go back and review your constitution and also the Local Government Act in relation to county councils, because I suspect that that is where that, I understand what you're saying in terms of your perspective, that it's more like a contribution from like a shareholder buying more shares or something like that.
Yeah, exactly.
But my suspicion off the top of my head would be that it would, the way that they're treated in your accounts would be dictated by the governing documents, which would be the local government, relevant local government legislation and your constitution.
Absolutely, and I must admit I haven't looked to see what the definition is. I thought someone might know.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
And the next
So there's
ratio.
probably a follow-on, Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
Should we look at investigating it for potentially next year? Because I was also thinking very much along the same lines, that it's similar to rate revenue, but it's rates from our 4 constituent councils as opposed to thousands of rate payers. I'm just wondering, so, but we won't worry about it for these accounts, but if the general manager maybe in 12 months' time.
What can I ask?
Yeah, let's investigate it.
What's the potential impact if that was allowed to be changed?
You look at Indigenous people, not.
Yeah, it's only really the ratio, which would, so it's just an explanation thing, because we're this, the ratio is better, because we currently are this, that's how it is.
Yes, because it's falling into, I guess, general purpose revenue,
Yeah.
Similar to rates would in terms of calculating those ratios.
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah, it would make the ratio look a lot better.
Oh, it's Friday. Yeah,
Okay, unrestricted current ratio. So this is looking at how many unrestricted assets you have compared to your unrestricted liabilities. And at the moment, Upper Macquarie is sitting up above that OLG benchmark of 1.5%, sitting up at 5.3. And it's been above that ratio, that benchmark for a number of years now. And then our cash expense cover ratio. So this is looking at if nobody gave you any money for a period of time, how long would you be able to pay your recurring bills, so your employee costs, your other expenses, those sorts of things, from your existing cash reserves. And that at the moment is sitting at the 10.88 months at the moment. And that probably goes back to the sorts of comments that you were making previously. Findings, there were unqualified audit reports issued on the general purpose and Oxford special purpose, and I think I had that in there last year and it shouldn't be there, my apologies. All the reporting and disclosure obligations were satisfied with the Office of Local Government. Did you know that? No, I didn't. I had to make 3 phone calls and said to it, you've achieved it now. So there was a lot of work went into that. Karen Taylor is your director at the audit office. I think she looks after the constituent councils as well. She has a 2IC called Monique Bartley. Monique made a real effort to prioritise the work of Upper Macquarie to make sure it got reviewed. Sally, who worked for me, did the same thing, but to be honest, if Lisa hadn't put a good effort in to start with, this wouldn't have happened. So big kudos to Lisa for the work that she did on that. Just if anybody's interested, so probably some of you probably know Sarah Gull at the OLG. I spoke to her. She was the person I managed to get a hold of yesterday finally. At this point in time, there are actually only 3 councils in New South Wales that are lodged. So a month after you guys got in, there's still only 2 other councils who managed to get their financial statements in, and one of them is another county council. So well ahead of the pack. So that's great. There is a management. There is a management letter that's been drafted, but we haven't issued that as yet. There aren't, however, any matters of concern in there. There's one IT matter and one about employees not filling out leave forms when they go on leave. So they're operational. There's nothing there's nothing of concern, and there's certainly going forward, if there are significant or high risk matters raised in your management letters, they will actually get specifically mentioned in the report to Parliament. So you don't have any of those, so that's great.
So could I ask, what, through you, Mr. Chairman, what the IT issue is?
Any questions, councillors? Yeah, I'll get to you in a sec, Councillor McKibben.
With regard to page 18 of our financial report, as in, I did highlight when we were putting it up for submission, stroke exhibition, which is on page 18. There were some terms used, and I was seeking clarification whether we were allowed to change from mayoral fee to chair fee, from councillors to members, we're members, not councillors, the legislation
Yeah, I would think yes, you could, yes.
and councillors, including mayoral expenses, etc. So members again. So given I assume it would be too late now to change, but could we potentially have that?
We're not resubmitting at this point.
Yeah, no, that's why I'm just asking whether we could have actually changed for next financial year.
Yeah.
So that the correct term, given the Act did change, I think it was about a year or so ago, that we became members, no longer councillors, etc.
No, that's
Chairman, Mr. Chairman, we were saying we got for mark this year, we just missed that. And you're right, absolutely.
It's interesting, the audit office didn't pick it up, so it was legislated. That's interesting. Not you, as I said, who audited as such. Councillor McKibben, did you have a question?
I just had an issue as to what the IT issue was that may be raised in the management letter.
Oh, okay. It's one of the exercises that we do in relation to, so you'd all be aware of the Auditor General's report to Parliament that is now submitted on an annual basis. So as part of that, they have key areas that they focus on each year, which change, and they send us as their audit service providers a list of queries and issues that they want us to cover off with councils in order to inform the content of that report. So one of the key topics this year was obviously COVID-19. So there were quite a number of data collection queries in relation to how councils responded to COVID-19. One of the ones that, well, the only one that that was in that data collection questionnaire that Upper Macquarie had raised in their management letter was that when everybody sort of went off-site and when COVID hit, there was obviously, you'd all know, you probably all got more spam and people wanting you to click on links and things like that. There was an expectation from the Audit Office and the state government that councils made a point of raising formally with their staff the increased cybersecurity risk attached to working remotely and people taking advantage of the COVID situation, those sorts of things. So the management letter is basically that in that COVID environment, there was an increased risk of cybersecurity incidents and that council hadn't formally communicated that increased risk with the IT users in the council.
So we've been required to have done like a bit of a course with our staff, so to speak. Okay, you're off site now, these are the type of measures in place, so we should have had like a check sheet to make sure.
Yeah.
Like a check sheet to make sure.
Yeah, yeah. I was management letters, so that was it. Yeah.
Was that required or expected? Required to inform or expected to inform?
I believe it's required under the Australian Cybersecurity Centre Security Advice on COVID-19. That's the reference I have here.
Sorry, I missed that.
No? Yeah, so you didn't get the email either. So no, so all it's really saying, and I guess the state government, and I think this, the Federal Signals Office and organisations like that have issued it, and what they're saying is under that, council should have made a point of, as we all probably should have, of making sure that their people using their IT were thinking about the additional threats arising out of the working remotely, and also people taking advantage of the fact that people were working remotely on a more frequent basis. So that's the IT related issue.
The General Manager has a comment, then I'll comment on that.
Mr. Chairman, the answer to that question is exactly as we provided to the to the external auditors. However, the problem we have with issues like that is that it's an whatever happens to a great big council needs to be done at a micro council, and what they don't realise is that we were working remotely all the time.
Yeah.
So the COVID system virtually made no difference to the fact that all of our guys are out with tablets, using laptops. We upgraded the security system and all the rest of it, but we had nothing further to brief our staff on in general terms. But
except to say to be more aware.
Yeah.
So I haven't sent this through the audit office for review as yet, so I'm not promising, but I'll see what I can do.
Yeah.
But certainly, and the General Manager's comments are correct, that the data collection questionnaire is the same questionnaire that will be applied to Bathurst Regional Council and Oberon Council and City of Sydney Council. So it is very much, as the General Manager pointed out, it is very much a one-size-fits-all document that may, it's not tailored to the nature of a smaller council.
If I could, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
The Federal Signals branch, because I get updates from them in relation to small businesses, and with COVID, the threat of cyber security to all levels of business and government has increased significantly. I think that's where they're coming from, is that increased risk and the associated risk of theft of information, personal information.
A question that was posed to me the other day is, we've got 4 councillors that are, zooming in from, say, their homes. It was put to me by a member of the public. They said, what if you had a councillor that was someone who really didn't care a lot about confidentiality, and they had a friend in their house and you were talking about confidential matters, and they're zooming, hadn't declared, because sometimes people mute their what's going on and take their video off. And it was put to me, and a couple of us got talking about it. This new world we're in, you don't know who's technically in the room, or if they're muted or taking their screen off, you don't know who's there. And so how, this security, how do we put that in place? Has anyone thought of that? It was put to me the other day, and I thought, yeah.
Mr. Chairman, councillors have obligations under the Local Government Act, and if they're in confidential, then they are required to ensure that the meeting is confidential. I understand, wherever it's held and however they're attending.
You're right there, but as you know, in a lot of things, it's amazing at any level of government how confidential matters get out.
Oh, absolutely. I'm saying they have an obligation. I'm not saying that's preventing it happening.
Yeah, that's it. It's the things that can happen. Councillor Reynolds, Member Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just before I go into my question, as I've noted, since the audit started at my council, we've certainly increased our cyber security and processes, etc., and upgrades. So it is having effect, the requirements in the questionnaire. To a question with regard to page 20 of the financial report, with regard to receivables, so note number 7, 2 questions there, and 3 points. One, very positive, user charges and fees, I assume outstanding, so receivables have dropped from 90,000 to 24,000, which is an indication of why we've got more cash, yet our profit was only up by 44,000, or our profit was mentioned before. Other debtors which have come on there as a new item, any indication, it's only $9,000, but any indication of what those other debtors are?
My head. I'm racking my head. I don't know. I can check for you though.
Could be our pins, our pin notices on.
Oh yes, because I think they're classified differently to your aerial spraying.
Yeah.
Would that be right?
It's about the right amount.
Yes.
Could
Because they're not user charges, so they'd be, yep.
And my other question is in provisions for impairment, there's user charges and fees, $13,000, which there was nothing last financial year.
Yes.
So what is that provision for?
They are for people who, when, as you would notice, there was a very large debt figure at the end of last financial year, the 90,000. There was a very detailed review done of who was outstanding. There's been very active follow-up of that. And what came out of this, and correct me if I'm wrong, but what came out of this was that there was some ambiguity, not ambiguity. The council may not have had all the documentation and the paperwork that it needed to in order to legally enforce some of those debtors. Would that be fair?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, these are actually the items that were the subject of a debtors report not that long ago.
Yeah.
Well, we want them.
Yes. Yeah. So that's an impairment at the moment that will be wiped this next financial year. Is that,
My understanding is that at the moment those debtors are still sitting on the books, unless you haven't written them off since.
Some of it has been approved by the council for write-off, but in this financial year.
Yes.
So it wasn't noted out at this point.
So yeah, all that is as an allowance, a provision at the end of last year, and then if we've had subsequent meetings where council's approved those write-offs, that will occur. Yeah.
just to ask the question for clarity.
Yeah.
I was aware of
But
the.
yeah, some of these amounts had a fair bit of length on them in terms of the time that they've been sitting there as well. So while it's never pleasing to write things off, there's certainly been a lot of work done in ensuring that what is on the books is going to be recoverable.
Thank you.
Yeah, you've got to be realistic.
Yes. Yeah.
Any other question, members? So our Zoom members, any other questions?
No, I'm not. Thanks.
Leanne, basically, I've been here for quite a while now, and it's heartening to see a change of position of this council, how we're going financially, that our ratios are a lot better, and we're achieving a lot more. Is there anything that you've seen in your time in the audit that there's areas that we as council could be potential improvement areas, that maybe new sources of revenue? Have you seen with all the documents that gives you light to something that we might be part of?
I guess the problem that you've always got is that you are constrained by your week's council, and that's it. But in terms of your governing structure, that's really all you're able to be involved with from a legal perspective. So that's always going to provide some constraint about what you can do. There are things out there from time to time, like an example is the weeds book that we talked about. But then that's also got to be balanced with having the resources available in order to fulfil the conditions of those agreements as well. So probably nothing really is specific in terms of improvement, but I have seen in the last couple of years a real improvement in the way, certainly from the accounting perspective and policies and procedures and documentation, the way that that has improved significantly over the last couple of years. And I think that gives you a really solid basis on which to make decisions. So going forward, you've got relevant and up-to-date financial information at hand, whereas I don't believe that that was necessarily the case previously. And that then gives the council the capacity to make decisions on current information.
Because I guess what I'm getting at, it seems to me in time, I think my fellow members will say that we're getting greater relationships with other authorities, local land services. The DPI seems very happy with what we're doing, but there seems to be potential that we might be able to do work for other authorities that I guess like consultancy type work.
Yeah.
To see, because we seem to be in a position now that we're looked at a lot more favourably, and we've got the staff and the resources to be able to provide a better package.
Yeah.
So to me, it appears that our relationships could potentially open new doors for us.
Yeah, and look, certainly I would agree. My perspective is that the way in which the council is spoken about or seen by other councils in the region has certainly improved significantly over the last couple of years. And that's, you're right, that's good, because that's then all about building relationships and building trust that you can deliver as well.
Okay. The councillors, one final members, final chance. Any other questions? Very quiet lot today.
Yeah.
Councillor Reynolds, you had questions that you asked last couple of meetings. You covered those.
Yeah, that's like the one for next financial year, the changing of the
terms of that.
Yeah.
Yep. Leanne, thank you very much again, and greatly appreciated. And yeah, thank you for your presentation.
So I'll get the management letter. I'll work on that management letter point for you if I can. And we'll get that issued as well.
Yep.
Or the audit office will.
Thank you very much.
Great.
Thanks, Leanne.
Thank
Enjoy
you.
the meeting. I have to walk through this way. Yeah, sorry. In front of everybody.
Yeah. Okay, councillors, we have a recommendation there, as you've seen, items points 1 and 2. Can I move on, Mr. Councillor Reynolds?
Yes.
Councillor Leslie?
Yes.
All 4?
Aye.
Darren?
Mr. Chair, matters arising. I'm not quite sure whether we can do it.
No, look, I'm happy, yeah.
I'd like to actually know to thank you. Looks painful.
Cream.
Matters arising, Mr. Chair. A note of thanks, and whether we could actually move a vote of thanks in Lisa, and actually getting the accounts done so quickly, done accurately, and as in being the first council off the rank. If someone else is happy to second it, that's what I'd like to move.
Look,
I'll second it.
Yep, thank you. Look, I was going to say that, look, to be honest, members, that the job that Leanne and David have done, and I thank you, Member Reynolds, for that recommendation. That, yeah, you have done a wonderful job, and it's actually quite nice. Every all the time, you know, I mean, David Baffers to come in first at something, so that's wonderful that we've done that. It's quite scary that only 3 have done it. So thank you, Councillor Reynolds and McKibben, and yeah, thank you for your hard work, and you've set the standard. Yes, please.
Mr. Chairman, just if it isn't obvious, I just want to state the obvious, and that is that this is actually the first year that we didn't get Bathurst Regional Council to actually do our financial statement. So Lisa has done the work that we previously paid Bathurst to do. So it is actually a significant achievement. Thank you.
And the saving.
Yeah, and saving.
Yep. Okay, councillors.
But you weren't working with someone else's timetable, were you? You're working with your own timetable.
Yeah.
Okay, councillors, we've got item 2, delivery program annual progress report. We have a recommendation down at the bottom. Can I move it a second, please? So Councillor McKibben, Councillor Fry. Any comments, councillors? Members, sorry. I keep saying that. Councillor Reynolds. Member Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Railway corridor inspections under object 1. I think it says, I assume this was last financial year, was it? 41 kilometres. Is that, or is that current that we've just done 41 kilometres of rail line inspection for this new financial year?
Mr. Chairman, this is actually for the year up to June 30, 2020. And the other thing which is relevant to a number of those achievements is that, of course, if we haven't re-inspected a site, whether it's a railway, a road or a property at this point in time, then it appears to be outstanding. That doesn't mean that the work hasn't been done. So it's just a cut-off as at the 30th of June.
So a follow-on question on that, Mr. Chair. So where are we up to for this current financial year with railway inspections and the objectives, given my queries, particularly around the Millthorpe Blaney area, the amount of blackberries that are just going berserk and landholders are giving feedback that they're not very happy that they're having to control weeds, but the railways are just letting them seed and rebreed onto their properties.
Sorry, and Mr. Chairman, on the issue that I raised privately with you about the railway line through the Lithgow Valley and the weeds on that, which was expected. So it's not just out west, it's even...
Member Kingham was asking about areas that was in your area too, wasn't it? Yes. Yep.
Mr. Chairman, so I'll address both of those. So firstly, in the 191 hectares that is referred to as having had biosecurity risk detected, that includes the whole of the Drummondville line, which was inspected in the last financial year, and they have had weed control notices issued, and that's an example of where they haven't yet been re-inspected because enough time hasn't passed. So they will show up as hopefully as an achievement in the next or in the current financial year we're in. All of that is in there, and there's some other sections of the main line that still need to be inspected. I can't off the top of my head recall the detail. In relation to Lithgow, so this was a section which turned out not to be the country rail network as I refer to it, but actually the Sydney rail network. So it's basically through the Lithgow township and up a little bit up the gully. So we, some time ago around when you mentioned it, so they have been inspected, weed control notices have been issued to whatever they're called, but Transport for New South Wales. I haven't heard whether or not the work's been done yet, so I'm guessing that from the look on your face that maybe it hasn't yet.
Oh no, someone's been done.
Okay, so we did issue the control notices. We were told that it will be done, but it hasn't been re-inspected, so again, it wouldn't show up as being an achievement yet. The other thing I was expecting with Sydney Trains is that because we haven't in the past had those discussions about, your duties and responsibilities, etc., we weren't sure what response we would get from them, but we sent the notice to Transport for New South Wales, who previously agreed to do stuff. So I am expecting a positive response there.
So, Mr. Chair, another follow-on question, and it actually relates to the Lithgow LGA. I was speaking last night with, I think she termed herself the recovery coordinator, Rachel Nichols.
Yes.
And she was indicating about some weed issues, as in particularly after fire and as in weeds popping up. So a question through to the General Manager, are we looking with regard to that Lithgow area that was burnt, and I suppose across the Oberon area as well, at sort of undertaking some extra inspections or try and get on top of those weeds, or at least give notice to landholders, as in private and public landholders, about weeds which will probably come back a lot quicker than the pastures, etc., in those areas. Is there any plan at all to do some extra work there?
Mr. Chairman, we're obviously aware of the fires and the encroachment in the Lithgow and Oberon areas, and a lot of it was public land, as I understand it, but not all. So have we got a plan now to deal with that specifically? No. But is that one of the issues that we need to consider soon, very soon, in the context of an item for the workshop, which is how do we better target where the problems are, etc. So I think that now that you've raised it here, I think I'll add that to as one of the items that we should use to help target us in on the right stuff.
Check out wild habitats.
That's right.
And a question through to
Yes, Councillor Kim, you're next.
Leslie, following on this same issue, and also to Member Ring. Is there an opportunity in that $1 million that you got from the federal government, the Lithgow Council got for bushfire recovery, etc.? Are there any funds, and is there any possibility that we could actually approach the Lithgow Council about getting some funding to particularly the roadsides or any areas where weeds have come back out of that $1 million in funding?
I'm not speaking on behalf of Council, but Lithgow Council, but I think that funding is pretty well been sorted as to where it's going to go. But,
Councillor Leslie's right. It's all gone, basically.
You can but ask.
Member McKibben, sorry.
Yes, through you, Mr. Chairman, going back to the railways, I think we said 191 kilometres in the last year was inspected, and I think that's what John Holland originally agreed they would do. Then they bought a spraying rig, or built a spraying rig, then they decided not to use it. But am I reading it correctly on page, which it's the second page of it, I think, page 4 of 15, that only 27 hectares had been suitably treated of the original 191 hectares, whereas I thought they were going to treat the whole lot last year, and they had indicated they had a budget for that.
Mr. Chairman, because this is only for a period of time, it's sort of hard to keep track of the whole story. And I mean, like we do with the register, where it's an ongoing current situation.
Yes.
So the bottom line is that a number of those sites that were inspected in 1819 had been inspected and re-inspected and dealt with. There are a number of places which are now in 1920, which is some of those original ones and recent ones, such as the Tremondrel, such as more recently the Sydney Rail stuff. And of that, only 27 hectares have been suitably treated at this stage. And there's a lot still to re-inspect. One of the problems we've had is we can't get back on to do the inspections on the active line in the same way as we had previously, because it involved us being in railway machinery on the railway line stuck in a little cabin, which is uncovered. So what we've started doing and detected these particular ones is we've been trying to find, let's just say, the side roads in, and drones and all sorts of other things to detect how it is going. So it's a work in progress. It's a practical obstacle at the moment.
Member McKevin?
And if I could have followed on, yes, I would have thought that for this sort of situation, the drones would be very useful for being able to check, to do those re-inspections. But the other thing is, I thought that the concept was that we would agree a further number of kilometres with locations for this coming year, 2021, with John Holland. When do we sit down with them to agree that, or has that been done already?
Mr. Gilliam?
Mr. Chairman, yeah, I suppose you could say the outstanding areas are from Bathurst out towards Orange as far as the boundary goes, and the section that Blaney councils have referred to back towards Blaney. So they are, some of that, I'm not sure about all yet, is to be inspected in this current financial year, but we've been, I won't say sidetracked, but we've been very busy with the forestry and Crown Lands effort in the recent short term. The railways are still on the program. We just haven't got there back to those ones yet.
We can't forget the rail corridor that goes from Taranah through to basically Oberon as well. Even though it's disused, it has blackberries and weeds, and is controlled by John Holland.
Mr. Chairman, that hasn't been forgotten. It's actually been put on Tony's list. I honestly don't know where it's at the moment.
Mr. Chairman, just speaking of John Holland, their contract is up for renewal, so there is the possibility that there may be someone else. Again, I'm not quite sure when it concludes, whether it's the end of this calendar year but as in just to keep that on our radar, that there is the potential that we may have to start from scratch again with a new organisation. So it may be worth communicating if there is a change with the minister, and I suppose the Transport Minister, who's the local member at this stage, for Bathurst, just to highlight that, if we are having any challenges, to communicate straight away through. As in, it may stay status quo, which means that your agreements, but there is also a possibility, through Mr. Chair, that there may be a challenge.
I guess that's the opportunity we have when we talk to the member and the minister, that we can ask if they do negotiate contracts, that working with authorities such as ours is part of a process. Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, I agree that could be a significant disruption for a period of time. Fortunately, the approach we took from the start was to put the Secretary of the Transport Department on notice. So he's the one we'll be serving our penalty notice on, not the contractor.
I'll knock on the door of a contractor if it is. Member McKibben.
Yes, if I could, page 13. I think in the measuring the weed biosecurity activity and outcomes, I think we're doing a good job, but I was, as the General Manager knows, I was quite alarmed when I caught up with the Mayor of Orange, and he seemed very unaware of how successful we had been with our activities. And as a result, the General Manager and Lisa prepared a presentation for him before he went to a New South Wales Weeds Council meeting last Tuesday. But I had lengthy discussions with him a Saturday night ago, where I actually caught up with him. But I was quite alarmed that he was really unaware of what we were doing and still thought we were a useless organisation. So we have to get out there and do the pitch. And I realise, Member Reynolds, that you've been with Hartley and Bathurst branch doing presentations. I heard that from others, and we've arranged to do Oberon. But, you know, I think I certainly, when we've got someone who's like Reg Kidd, we really need to ensure that they're properly appraised of our of what we're doing. And I do commend Lisa and David for doing an excellent paper for him to go off to the Weeds Council with. But it was surprising he didn't know more about us or that what we were doing.
Member Reynolds.
As a follow-on, Mr. Chair, it is disappointing because I did actually forward Reg Kidd, the State Chair of the Weeds Council, one of our business papers, as in public business papers, several months earlier. I think it was February or March of this year, which actually outlined a lot of our achievements, and he actually acknowledged and thanked and said good work. To then turn around and say he was unaware of anything is extremely disappointing. So I assume he didn't actually read it. Just wrote back a couple of words.
Well, I said to him, I think Bruce Reynolds is made you aware of this thing. So I had a discussion with him some time ago, a long time ago or something. But anyway, I haven't followed. I haven't followed him up since the paper was sent, but I'll intend to do so, just to make sure he is.
The chair just
and I have suggested that he might like to come and have a presentation from Upper Macquarie County Council or attend one of our meetings if he would like. So I think we should pursue that.
Yeah, look, I will pursue that because I've got to take up a couple of matters with him, and I've actually spoken to council up there, but had given him some information some time ago. So yeah, so I personally will follow up, Mayor Kidd.
And just
yeah, well, I did say I'd ring him back after the meeting, so I'll as well. So I think we just keep it. You know, we've got to keep people aware. People have short memories sometimes.
New South Wales Farmers Executive Council were yesterday actually provided with that paper that the General Manager provided, thanks to Member McKibben. And Reg Kidd actually it's Bruce Reynolds' Weed Council. And I said, no, it's not. I said, so if there's any blame to come on to me, because I'm also an Executive Councillor. But I also yesterday at that Executive Council meeting, which was via Zoom, I did say the PowerPoint presentation that I've given to Bathurst and to Oberon, and happy to forward through to the General Manager and back to all county councillors, because it just came from our business papers, previous business papers, that the New South Wales Farmers Executive Council was going to receive that, given it's a public document, as in there's no harm. So at least it's on New South Wales Farmers Association's radar now. Yep. And at the two meetings that Councillor McKibben, Member McKibben referred to, very positive feedback overall from both the Bathurst branch of New South Wales Farmers, where there was 15 members, and Hartley last night, which there was about 8, I think it was, members, about the performance of Upper Macquarie, and particularly thinking that there was a presentation to show what Upper Macquarie is actually doing. So some positive feedback from producers in the area, but statewide we are getting recognition as well through New South Wales Farmers, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Member Reynolds. Member Leslie?
Sorry, just on a slightly different subject. The Biosecurity Act, I assume, requires that we enhance the biosecurity of our region, and we're under that. In the Australasian Beekeeper that I got yesterday, and I read, there was an article based from Britain about the value of verges, and they were talking about road verges, but it has to also apply for rail verges in enhancing native pollinators and pollinators generally for biodiversity and doing this. Now, is this beyond our reading to sort of be talking to people about keeping those verges such that native bees and native pollinators can be enhanced and not just killed with sort of ordinary weed spray that we need to get rid of the weeds. Now, I understand it's a difficult balancing act, but you can't do the balancing act if you don't know the problem. And so I'm raising the problem about to try and enhance the value of these corridors in supporting biodiversity and supporting pollinators generally across our region. Can I just get a comment on that?
Mr. Chairman, if you take our function literally, and I refer also to the comment that our external auditor made earlier, the only legal obligation or remit that we have is to inspect properties, anybody's properties, and tell them whether they have a weed problem. And if they do, we can also tell them that they need to do something about it. And what we never do, because apart from the fact that it would be very unwise, we aren't really experts in that strict sense of the word, we never tell people that they have to spray. And if people came back to us with sensible, I mean, seriously when I say sensible, but sensible alternatives that would control weeds within a reasonable time, then we would accept that no more or less than using, let's call them harsh chemicals. But I don't think that we have any explicit role relating to biodiversity conservation other than we have a legal duty not to cause harm. So I think that local land services are the body that has the sort of role that you're talking about. It doesn't mean we couldn't be involved in some way or take it into account, but I don't think we have what I'd call a lead role of any sort in that area. That help?
It answers the question.
Member Leslie Stump, and Member Fry, there raised some time ago in this council about council looking at doing trials with other measures rather than harsh chemicals. So whether it's something moving forward in the future, as was said by Member Fry, that we're able to seek grants or support to try trials on other methods in dealing with issues like you just raised. So that's maybe the potential, but because we are now a weeds council and is achieving and
at this stage, I'd just be happy if the General Manager just kept aware of my comments, and when an opportunity comes up with, if and when you have discussions with local land services, that sort of thought of the value of corridors and the value of those corridors to native pollinators and to extending biodiversity through the region. If those discussions could be had, that may in the long run, enhance and facilitate these things, that would be a very good start. We need to have these things conversations need to be started, and attitudes need to be changed, and I think that's what I'm trying to do, somewhere along this line to do that.
Yes, Councillor McKibben, and then Councillor Fry after that. Councillor McKibben?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In response to Member Leslie, I think the roadside vegetation management plans is one of the areas that councils can actually seek to achieve what you're talking about in relation to biodiversity. But the problem obviously is that we have to all realise that we will have no biodiversity if the weeds completely annihilate the desirable species and native species and endangered species of plants. So I know in Oberon we talked about biosecurity and biodiversity, and obviously our roadside vegetation management is being revised at the moment to take account of obviously Upper Macquarie's issues, but things such as bee pollination and biodiversity are very important, and that's part of, I think, and should be integral to all councils' roadside vegetation management plans.
Thank you. Member Fry?
Yeah, look, I think in terms of alternatives to spraying weeds, which has been our traditional method, I think there are a number of emerging alternatives to that, and as Councillor Leslie says, and I was hoping we could, and I know I've requested this other times, we could incorporate this into our next workshop, which is October, is it?
October.
It's October, I didn't have that.
9th, isn't it?
Yeah. Is there any room left in this workshop? I know I missed out in the last couple.
9th of October is our next.
I will ask the GM about that, Member Fry.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I haven't got it on the list at the moment, whether I missed it or not. I just need a little bit of, like a couple of notes or something to try and highlight what the subject, like what it is really, and I think you've done it before, Member Fry, just so that members, when I put the agenda out, actually know what they need to think about beforehand. But I have no particular item covering that at the present time.
So, Member Fry, can you contact the GM after meeting next week or whatever and just have a chat and just give him some dot points to set the discussion in motion?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Have we got a couple of $100 spare to bring a guest speaker up for an hour?
A couple of $100 spare to bring a guest speaker up for an hour.
Oh. I'll talk to GM about it. On notice. Any other questions, councillors, about item 2?
Yes.
So,
One more, Mr.
Yep.
Chair. On page 13, the 476, the last tick point, 476 individual properties that we have. It's fantastic, we've done the first inspection of them. Do we have a plan, or are we going to discuss it at the October workshop to try and get on around all of these properties as close to the time that we've allocated in the plan, so that particularly as we're looking as though we're having a good spring, seeding will take place quite quickly. So, and we'll be way worse off if we do continue to have this good spring. So I just want through you, Mr. Chair, the General Manager, whether there is a plan to try and attack those 476, of which 75 are subject to enforceable biosecurity directions.
Mr. GM?
Mr. Chairman, the short answer is yes, because the way the register works, which is also the inspection plan by default, says that there is a compliance date, and our aim, sometimes not achievable due to, let's say, overcrowding of the work schedule, but our aim is to have those properties inspected within 1 month of the compliance date. So the intention is to have them inspected in a timely manner. But the difficulty is, of course, that the compliance date sometimes is not in relation to the season of flowering, etc., because if the inspection was only done a week ago, we have to give people a reasonable amount of time before we go back, etc. So it's got that intrinsic problem of having seasonal gaps that delay things more than we otherwise would want to do. It'd be great if we could inspect properties within 3 months of having given them the original notice every time. But, if it's blackberries in winter, you've got no chance of doing anything for 3 or 4 months. So the compliance date is the key to all of this, and as far as possible, we try to stick to it within that month. As the council will be aware, we have missed it a couple of times, but then we catch up as soon as we can.
Just a supplementary question, Mr. Jean, is there potential to look at our dates and the time frame we have? And, you know, I know what you're saying will depend on the season, but, you know, people understand we've been out there and we're going to do our job, that we might be coming back a bit quicker, or is that going to be a problem on our risk management and how we proceed with actions down the track? Can we review our time frame?
Mr. Chairman, the date we actually set for an individual property is whatever we set at the time, if that makes sense. The difficulty is once we've set the date, which is usually based on weather conditions, discussions with the property owner in some cases, and all sorts of other circumstances, means that once it's set, we're really stuck with it. Because if we go back early and say, bad luck, we can't do anything. Like, we can't enforce something if we're there a month early and say, why haven't you done anything? I say, well, I was going to do it next week, just about to start, nearly organised. And unfortunately, people do it at the last minute.
So you think our time frames are going okay?
I think we always should be careful about not extending them too far out. But we also would need to be able to justify. The example I use is if we ultimately took somebody to court and said we asked them to do this and we gave them the trail of evidence, and it showed that we turned up a month before they were due, and then we issued a penalty before.
I was getting at the time frame, but we weren't coming early.
Yeah.
They weren't giving us much time. I wasn't saying come early.
All right.
Do we not give them as much time? Are we giving too much time?
Mr. Chairman, typically what we do, and I'd have to say the drought confused this a little bit, because like in Wiseman's Creek, we were still doing property inspections, but there is nothing you could possibly have done to the serrated tussock there at the time. I mean, it was only just alive, and if you sprayed it, nothing would happen. What we typically do as a benchmark, we sort of say, well, serrated tussock, you can spray it all year round. We tend to look at, under normal conditions, about 3 months to get your act together. But when we then issue a direction notice, we give a shorter period of time. So we tighten it up as you go, and then the minute you haven't met your direction within those few weeks, then it's the penalty. So to keep the hard end of it effective, we need to be seen to be reasonable in that early phase.
That's fair enough. Any other questions, Member McKibben?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Look, I'm just raising it as we're talking about inspections. Obviously, Council received a legal letter in relation to property at Black Springs about their neighbours not spraying or in a timely manner. Has a response been sent in relation to that matter?
Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure what we're talking about.
I will raise it with. I will raise it with the general manager outside the meeting. Councillor Capel and I actually received a copy of the letter.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I need to take that.
Yeah, we will give. I'll come back to you on that one.
Because I started to actually jot down some notes for a response, so I'm quite happy to work with the general manager response.
This sounds like an operational matter, and it's not our duty.
It is an operational matter.
And not starting to write. We don't write letters for the staff. It's not our role.
No, that's why I asked if the response had been gone.
Yeah. Sometimes Member Fry, with other knowledge known by people in the area, can help with the process. So I think that's more what Member McKibben is on about. Any other questions, members? Okay, we have a recommendation there. All for? Against? Carried. Thank you. Item 3, mandatory amendments to council model codes. We've got a recommendation of a mover and a seconder. Who's on screen? Member Fry, Member McKibben. Any questions, members?
We have to do it.
So,
No choice.
yeah, no, someone asked. No? Okay, all for?
Aye.
Against? Carried.
Yes.
So, you want that? Yes. Yep. No?
I just need proof to do it.
Okay, we've got, that's it. Okay, councillors, I declare the meeting closed at 3:40. Thank you very much for your attendance today, and have a good weekend, safe weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you, members.
Thank you. See you guys.
See you later.
Thank you, everyone.
That's in the